In our last talk, we explored the difference between happiness and peace. We saw that happiness rises and falls with circumstance, while peace quietly deepens as the self loosens and awareness becomes more present. This talk asks the next question. What does awakening actually feel like? Not what people say it should feel like, not what we imagine enlightenment must be, but what it actually feels like from the inside. Let's begin. Have you ever experienced a moment when peace suddenly felt deeper than usual? A moment when clarity arrived without effort, or when the sense of me seemed to soften for no obvious reason. For many people, those moments pass almost unnoticed. For others, they begin appearing more often. And sometimes they quietly mark the beginning of something profound, the unfolding of awakening. One of the greatest misconceptions about enlightenment is that it arrives dramatically. A flash, a revelation, a single life-changing event. This isn't how I experience it. It arrives quietly, almost gently, like the first light of dawn, so gradually that you only realize the darkness has lifted when you look back. As we've explored throughout these talks, the mind gradually constructs the self. And for much of our lives, that self feels completely real. It defends, it compares, it remembers, it worries. It carries the constant tension of trying to become someone. But as awareness deepens, something begins to change. The self no longer feels quite so solid. Its stories lose some of their authority. Presence begins lasting a little longer. The mind becomes quieter. And one feeling often appears before any other. Relief. Not excitement, not ecstasy, but relief. As though something we have carried for years has quietly been set down. Presence isn't something we create. It is what remains when the mind stops dividing the present moment. The moment is complete, without addition. It is the natural home of awareness. And whenever presence deepens, the self naturally begins to loosen. The remarkable thing is that the filter doesn't struggle. The filter simply continues to fall. The struggle comes from the ego, trying to prevent it. Not because the ego is bad, but because it has spent an entire lifetime protecting an identity it believes is essential. That tension is often mistaken for failure. I don't think it is. I think it is one of the clearest signs that something within us is beginning to change. As that resistance softens, peace begins to stabilize. Not emotional peace, something much deeper, a stillness that no longer depends on circumstances. And perhaps that is the first unmistakable sign that consciousness is already expanding. Because awakening doesn't begin when extraordinary things happen. It begins when ordinary moments become more peaceful. As absolute consciousness continues to expand, certain qualities begin to appear. Not because we force them, not because we decide to become spiritual, but because awareness is expressing itself more freely. Peace becomes deeper, not temporary calm, but something that remains, even when life becomes difficult. Clarity begins to replace constant analysis. We don't think less, we simply need thought less often. Compassion becomes natural, not something we remember to practice, but something that quietly arises. Because separation no longer feels quite so convincing. Service becomes less like duty and more like the natural expression of feeling connected to life. And intuition begins to emerge, not as something mysterious, not as magic, but as a quieter way of knowing, a form of understanding that seems to arrive before thought has finished speaking. Physical intelligence doesn't disappear. It continues doing exactly what it has always done. But it is no longer carrying the whole burden of navigating life. As absolute consciousness expands, more of that expansion is quietly illuminated through divine intelligence, appearing within life as intuition. The mind begins to follow, and everything feels more natural. As awakening deepens, the self continues to soften, not disappearing overnight, but gradually becoming less central. The need to defend, to compare, to prove, to become, slowly begins to dissolve. Life is no longer experienced primarily through the question, what does this mean for me? It begins to be experienced through simple presence. People often imagine enlightenment as a destination. I don't. I experience it as a gradual stabilization. More peace, less tension. More clarity, less confusion. More selflessness, less self. Not perfection, simply a quieter way of being. There are moments when the old patterns return, moments when the self tightens again. That isn't failure, it is simply part of being human. Awakening isn't measured by never losing presence. It is measured by how gently and how quickly we return to it. Perhaps that is one of the clearest signs that absolute consciousness is expanding. The journey back becomes shorter each time. Presence becomes easier to recognize. Peace becomes easier to trust. And intuition becomes easier to follow. The path begins to feel less like effort and more like remembering. Looking back, I don't think enlightenment changes who we are. I think it reveals who we have always been. Beneath everything, the mind believed itself to be. If there is one thing I hope you remember from this talk, it is this. Enlightenment is not recognized by extraordinary experiences. It is recognized by extraordinary peace, not through ideas, not through effort, but through lived experience. Less tension, more presence. Deeper peace, clearer awareness. growing compassion, quiet intuition. The path is remarkably simple. Be present. Allow the filter to continue falling. Let the self loosen without resisting it. Everything else takes care of itself. The journey itself is the well-being. Because enlightenment doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives in a whisper, a moment of unexpected peace, a clarity that wasn't there before, a softening of me that feels less like becoming someone new and more like coming home. When those moments appear, however briefly, don't rush past them. Stay with them, because they are not the echo of awakening. They are awakening itself, quietly unfolding, one present moment at a time.